most wonderful, amazing Bill McKibben here to share a few words for the next 20 minutes, hopefully a little more. I know it's super exciting. We are really lucky to have Bill here. He's part of the McLean Film Festival and a really neat event at the Wilma tonight. I could spend all 20 minutes giving Bill's wonderful background. He's an author and advocate, 18 books, started 350, started a new organization, Third Act, done so many things. But he's mostly a global thought leader and probably one of the most influential climate advocates ever to walk this planet. And we have him here today, so grateful. And he's not going to let me say anything more. So thank you again for coming. And Bill, thank you.
Here. I did get to spend the morning in the Wilma at the McLean Festival, and they said to tell everybody to come on over this afternoon if you want to get indoors for a little while. It's free and there's amazing stuff going on. And tonight, one of my great friends in the whole world, Rick Bass, is having this concert there at 7:30. And it's going to be beautiful. It's partly in defense of the Yak Valley. And they've got this guitar that they made from a windfalled Engelmann spruce up there where the Forest Service wants to clear cut. And the musicians are going to be trading the guitar back and forth all evening and playing, and it should be really special. But it's special just out here. I mean, I've been coming to Missoula on and off for a very long time. The very first time, this will date me for if there's anybody here who's as old as I am, the very first time I came here as a young rider, I gave a reading at a local institution called Freddie's Feed and Breathe. It remains very much lodged in my mind as the only reading I've ever given at a feed store. It was great, but to see the farmers market and everything else, man, you guys have got it going on. And then to look here and just see the number of people here in this county hard at work on trying to figure out what we do about the climate crisis is awfully moving to me. You know, I wrote the first book about all of this back in the 1980s, and really in some ways the hardest part back then was just that it felt lonely because, you know, it was like one of those nightmares where you can see a monster coming, but you can't convince anyone else to turn around and look and things. And now there's lots and lots of people looking, which is good because the nightmare is very much upon us, you know. I mean, we should pause for a minute amidst all this great beauty on this beautiful day and just think for a moment about what people in Western Tennessee and the Carolinas and the Florida Panhandle are going through right now. The water is still rising in place after place. The mountaintops of North Carolina some of them got 4 feet of rain in the course of a day. They didn't break their old record by an inch or two. They broke it by a couple of feet. It's the kind of weather that you can only have on a globally warmed planet, and we see it everywhere now. There are huge floods in much of Europe and much of North Africa right now, even as there's the biggest drought we've ever seen in the Amazon, drying it out and setting it on fire. I was in Billings and Bozeman last week, and the sky was so dark with the smoke from wildfires you couldn't see very far, you know. We're reminded constantly of where we are. 2023 and 2024 have been the 2 warmest years, the 2 hottest years in the last 125,000 years. Things are now spiking in a way that scientists had long predicted, but we didn't know exactly the moment it would happen. It's happening, and it's happening very fast, and it is very, very scary. We've increased the temperature of this Earth about 1.5 degrees Celsius, so almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's set off chaos of the most remarkable kind. The poles are melting, The great currents of the Atlantic are starting to flicker and falter, on and on and on. On our current trajectory, unless we change things fast, we're headed towards 3 degrees Celsius, which is 5 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit by the time the youngest people here are my age or before. And if that happens, then we won't have civilizations like the ones we're used to having. That's just too much. It's too much change, among other things. As I was saying to people earlier today, the UN says that'll produce somewhere between 1 and 3 billion refugees who have to leave their homes because it's too hot, or they're underwater, or they're on fire, or whatever it is. That's like 1 person in 4 on this planet having to get up and go. You saw what happened to our political life when 1 million people showed up on our southern border. Now multiply that by 1,000 and try to imagine how ugly and crazy and chaotic it will get. The biggest job humans have ever had, and the job that everyone here is engaged in, is not stopping climate change. It's too late for that. It's stopping it short of the place where it just cuts civilizations off at the knees. So that's what we're about, and it's the most important task humans have ever had, and it has to happen fast. If you take one thing away from this, it should be that. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world's climate scientists, have told us that we need to cut emissions in half by 2030 around the world to have some chance of staying on that trajectory that we put ourselves on theoretically in Paris in 2015. Okay? In half by 2030, which is 5 years and 4 months away, which sounds impossible. It's not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. And the reason it's not is the good news that I'm going to give you now in recompense for having dumped all that bad news on you. And the good news is that we know now what we need to do, and in some places we can see it happening. In the last decade, they don't want me to tell you the good news. In the last decade, engineers have dropped the price of energy from the sun and from the wind 90%. Sometime 3 or 4 years ago, we passed some invisible line when it became cheaper than burning coal and oil and gas to produce energy. We live on a planet, and you really have to just get this into your heart and mind. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is an amazing, amazing change. I am a Methodist Sunday school teacher sometimes, and that is a water into wine scale miracle that we now have around us. But we haven't yet fully taken it on board. Even those of us who care about this stuff, we still talk about alternative energy as if sun and wind were kind of the sort of Whole Foods of energy, okay? It's not. It's the Costco of energy. It is the stuff that's available cheap and in bulk, and we can make use of it now if we want to, and we're starting to in a few places. California, in this country, has done better than anyone else at building solar panels and putting batteries up. And that means finally this year it's begun to really show. For the last 100 days in California, they've produced more than 100% of the electricity that they use from renewable sources. That's a first. And it means that when the sun goes down at night, the biggest source of supply in California is batteries that have been soaking up that excess sun all day. That's amazing. It means that California this year will use about 30% less natural gas to make electricity than it used last year. A 30% fall in 1 year is a big enough number to start taking a bite out of that 3 degrees Celsius. It's a real indication that change can happen. And the place that it's happening now and fastest is in Texas, which is now putting up solar panels and batteries faster than California. So we'll have that same kind of number there next year. But it's not just in the States. I was just doing some reporting last couple of weeks on what's happening in the developing world. And I'll tell you a little story that I told people this morning. Pakistan, which is the country, by the way, that's probably been hit hardest by climate change of any other. Two of the most epic floods the world has ever seen in the last decade. The last one, 2 years ago, covered a third of the country with water and displaced 30, 40 million people. Pakistan's electric authorities, their utility, started reporting earlier this year that demand on the grid was down about 10%, which doesn't happen unless there's a real recession or something like COVID. So they couldn't figure it out really what was going on until people started studying pictures from Google Earth from Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad and things. And what they found was that people on their own were installing solar panels at an incredibly rapid rate on top of their stores, their businesses, their little malls, their homes. Cheap Chinese solar panels were now available in such quantity that people were they weren't asking permission, they weren't telling anyone, they were just putting them up. In the last 6 months, Pakistan has installed the equivalent of 1/3 of its electric grid in new solar panels just on top of people's places. That's another big number. And I've been talking to people all over Africa who report much the same, that this flood of cheap solar panels really has the chance to change things. Which makes it, I must say, difficult to understand why when I was driving from Billings to Bozeman, I drove past a brand new, soon-to-be-open gas-fired power plant in Montana. You guys actually have plenty of sun and plenty of wind, and instead your utility, which I'm afraid is one of the worst utilities that there is, saddling you guys with 40 years to pay for the most obsolete technology that's obsolete and outdated before it even gets fired up. You know, it's really shocking to watch. Plus, some places start to really fall behind. 90% of the new generating capacity in America this year is going to be from renewable energy, but not in Montana. So, do what you can, which means organizing, which is what I want to talk about for just a minute here. Because that's what I've spent the last few decades of my life doing, even though I'm not really cut out for it. You know, it's not I'm a writer. That means I like to sit in my room and type, you know, and I'm willing to, happy to come out and talk to people and things, but it's outside my comfort zone. We need everybody now outside their comfort zone. I'm going to tell you a little about the organizing that I've done, in part because I see one of my earliest collaborators, Jeremy Osborne, standing in the back of the crowd here. Jeremy was one of the 7 college students that started 350.org with me 20-odd years ago, I'd say. And we had no idea what we were doing. There were 7 students, there were 7 continents, each one took one. The guy who got the Antarctic also had to do the internet, you know, but we set off to work, and probably because of kind of beginner's luck, within a couple of years we'd organized the sort of first great climate moment. We had 5,200 simultaneous demonstrations around the country, including a beautiful one here in Missoula, and such thanks to the 350.org chapter here in Montana that continues to do fantastic work. You have to organize because logic and physics don't carry the day. In our world, Political power carries the day, and the fossil fuel industry still has enough to prevent us from taking the steps we need to take. So we have to break their political power. That's why at 350 we helped start this fight against the Keystone Pipeline that we eventually won. It's why we launched this fossil fuel divestment campaign that's become the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history. We're at $40 trillion now in endowments and portfolios that have divested from coal or gas or oil. And that's all been good work. It's helped a lot get us where we are. Most of that work was done by young people, really remarkable young people. Those kids who started 350.org, and then the ones on college campuses who built these divestment campaigns, and when they graduated and wanted to keep on working, formed the Sunrise movement that brought us the Green New Deal, and that was the thing that finally produced the Inflation Reduction Act, once it had gone through Joe Manchin and everything else. And that's why there's money now to help spur this move towards clean energy. And of course, the even younger kids all over the world, exemplified by Greta Thunberg. I was telling people earlier today, Greta, who I really adore and love working with, I got to write her a letter last summer congratulating her on her graduation from high school. So, think about that for a minute. They've all done their job incredibly well, sometimes I think almost too well, because I started hearing a few too many people my age say, oh, it's up to the next generation to solve this problem. Which sometimes if they really wanted to, add insult to injury, they would look at some young person and say, you give me hope. The truth is that not only is that unfair, it's unworkable too. For all their energy and intelligence and idealism, young people by themselves lack the structural power to make the change we need in the scale that's required in the time that we have. Greta may be Prime Minister of Sweden someday, but it's not going to be in 5 years, which is when we have to be making these changes. So we need to back them up. I started thinking about where there was structural power that remained to be organized. And the more I thought about it, as I said to someone the other day, if you've reached the age where you have hair coming out your ears, then you probably have structural power coming out your ears too, and that's why we started organizing Third Act for people over 60. There might be one or two in this audience today, and the rest of you tell your grandparents. We started 2 years ago, and we've got 100,000 volunteers now out around the country doing amazing work. A lot of that's electoral work right now. We've even got our own PAC, Gray PAC, and we're, people are writing 200,000 postcards a week into the swing states and on, because this election's awfully important. I'm really glad you're here today, but man, I hope tomorrow you're out figuring out how to get John Tester reelected to the U.S. Because you guys have superpowers for the next 35 days. You're extraordinarily important in the scheme of things, and those superpowers will vanish on November 6th. But for the moment, you may well turn out to be the people who decide what the U.S. Senate does or doesn't for the years ahead. But all those older folk are also doing all kinds of other good things, like showing up in big numbers now at the Public Service Committee and Commission hearings all over the country. That's where you got to be, because that's why they make stupid decisions like that gas plant in Laurel, because they get captured by the utilities and the whole thing is so dull that nobody's paying any attention to it, on and on and on. And they also, we've been causing as much good trouble as we can. One of the things we've been working on is going after the big banks, Citibank, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo Bank, Bank of America, that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry. We got into it because the young people from Fridays for the Future, Greta's group, said, we want to take on some of these banks, but we don't even have checking accounts, you know, can you help out? And we're like, sure. And I remember very well the first demonstration like this that we started at the very beginning. We went to, it was in Boston, and there were 200 or 300 high school kids there, because they always are. They understand perfectly well the barrel of the gun down which they are staring, you know. And they're somewhat sprier, so they were in the lead of the march. But at the back, there were a bunch of us from this nascent third act with a big banner that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." And since then, we've been at work. Last year, we had a day where in 100 cities across the country, we protested outside those banks and shut them down in a lot of places. I was in D.C. with a few thousand people. We've reached the age when sitting in on the sidewalk for 4 or 5 hours is less appealing than it would once have been. So we'd gone to every Goodwill store in the greater metro area of D.C. and found every rocking chair that they had, and that's what we used to shut them down. It was the most comfortable sit-in I ever went to, and the next day the Times had a big story about the rocking chair rebellion that was underway. So if you're willing to be part of it, join in with us and help. Find out someplace to dig in, because here's the thing that I will leave you with. I've already rattled on too long, and I apologize. The thing that I will leave you with is just this. Americans are default, one of our strongest traits as Americans is towards a kind of individualism. And that has good sides and bad sides, and I think maybe the bad sides have kind of gotten out of control in this country in a lot of ways. We don't do as good a job of knowing our neighbors and organizing as we could and should. It's really good to see things like this that set the light of that. But when you ask people too often about something like climate change, they default to a kind of individual answer. They worry about what's on their roof, what's in their garage. Those are important. I'm glad that I've got solar panels all over my roof. I'm glad they connect to an EV in the garage. But we are past the point where we're going to solve this thing one Tesla at a time. Okay? The most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make real change in the basic economic and political ground rules. And if we do that, I'm not going to promise you that we're going to win, because I don't know. Some of this stuff is pretty out of control. It's not a good sign that the great glaciers of the world are all rapidly melting, you know? The physics of this is daunting. So I'm not going to promise you that we're going to win, but I will promise you that we will give them one hell of a fight, and that's what we need to do, and we need to do it now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill. We are so honored. What's beautiful about this event is there's so many opportunities to be part of the movement and to join something and do something. But before we let Bill go on his hike or wherever he needs to go, at Climate Smart, we started at the very first year we incorporated ourselves to give away Smarty Pants Awards, because we're smart and we figure we can give away master's degrees and doctorate degrees and all kinds of things, and we just started doing it. Are there any Smarty Pants winners in the audience? 1, 2, 3, 4. A bunch of us are here. And so we have never given a Smarty Pants Award to somebody that didn't live in our community until today. So, in honor of all the work over the many, many decades that Bill has done and is still doing and is willing to do, we honor Bill McKibben with a doctorate of dedication. And when you win a Smarty Pants Award, you get your own Smarty Pants. They are thrift store soft pants for hard work. And has anyone